France and Germany are deepening defensive ties amidst growing global tensions. After Russia's deadly missile barrage on Kyiv on Wednesday evening, Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz have been meeting in Toulon this Friday. They've announced a new air defense support for Ukraine, a strong signal of unity against Moscow. The two have also launched a strategic dialogue on nuclear deterrence, aiming to better coordinate their defense postures as France remains Europe's only nuclear-armed state. And on tech policy, the leaders have stood firm against US pressure, vowing to uphold EU digital regulations after threats of tariffs from President Donald Trump. The message: Europe's two biggest powers are closing ranks on war, tech and nuclear security. Here's Emmanuel Macron on Ukraine.
The next few days will be decisive, marking the end of the period we had agreed with President Trump and with President Zelensky to hold the first meetings. And we will continue to exert pressure for additional sanctions to be imposed. We are ready to do this ourselves, but also with the United States of America to force Russia back to the negotiating table, while at the same time maintaining our support.
Well, let's bring into the conversation Marie Krpata, Research Fellow at the Study Committee on Franco-German Relations, that's CERFA, at IFRI. Welcome to the show, Marie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We just heard there from Emmanuel Macron about what Germany and France can do together in terms of sanctions on Moscow. Just how much power can they assume together as Europe's two leading economies? How much pressure can they really put on Moscow in the weeks to come?
Well, I think France and Germany are the main economies in the European Union. So Germany, it's 30% of the EU's GDP. France is 20% of the EU's GDP. So, of course, when it comes to economy and the possibility to sanction Russia, that is important. But I think what was important for this Franco-German Council of Ministers is really to show a reset in Franco-German relations, a realignment in the policies of these two countries. Now with the new government in Germany, with Friedrich Merz, because before that it was Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor in Germany, and the relationship between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron could have been better. So there are different topics that these two heads of state and head of government talked about in terms of economy, how to help the economy in Europe thrive, the competitiveness after the Draghi report came out last year that showed that Europe was lagging behind the US and China. But then, of course, also security and defense is important. The question of security guarantees when it comes to Ukraine, the question about US support for Europe and the US support for Ukraine. So these are topics that are very much important, especially for Friedrich Merz, who wants to take the lead on security and defense. And he wants to build the strongest army in Europe, with the German army now being modernized.
Friedrich Merz has been very blunt in terms of his assessment of European-US relations of late, and saying exactly what Europe needs to do to step up, really talking strong. Macron has also talked about Europe thinking in terms of a wartime economy, but yet these two leaders are not in really strong positions of power within the domestic scene. Merz relying on a coalition. Macron, well, we know what's coming on the 8th of September, and that could really derail his entire government. So we could be looking at very different relations between the two countries, even within 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the fear of Germany. What is going to come next after the 8th of September? The question of confidence that François Bayrou, the French PM, will ask. And then after 2027, because Emmanuel Macron is in office until 2027. And Germany pretty much relies on Emmanuel Macron, who's considered as being pro-European. But what is to come next? And the fear is that it's populist parties that will come next. And what will Europe look like under populist parties? And at the same time, Germany, as you said, has a coalition between the CDU-CSUs, the Conservatives, and the SPD, so the Social Democrats, and they have a majority of 12 voices in the Bundestag, in the German parliament.
Is that a lot or not?
It's not much. So indeed, when it comes to security and defense and the question of boots on the ground, for instance, that is exactly the numbers you're going to count. And there are different voices within the CDU-CSU and within the SPD as well. Although the pragmatic wing of the SPD is now in power and in government, there's also the left wing, which is more in favor of peace and was very much criticized for an appeasement policy with Russia as well. So this is something that is going to be very much complicated. Also, because of the history of Germany, which is considered a reluctant hegemon after the Second World War, and which rather, focused on its economy rather than security and defense. And now it needs to take this leading role.
Now, we talk about the changes that could be on the horizon, but do you think that this will change anything in terms of this nuclear deterrence move that Germany and France have announced today, or do you think that this is something that can be maintained across the political spectrum with both countries?
Well, I think so. One important momentum in the change of German foreign policy in the past years was the war in Ukraine and the Zeitenwende, the change of epoch that was announced by Olaf Scholz. The second moment is Trump coming back to the White House. And as you said, Friedrich Merz was quite blunt. And in February, after the elections, he said Europe needs to grow independent. And he also, reached out to France, European nuclear power, and see whether the vital interests of France can be extended to Germany. Because if they cannot rely on the US anymore from this nuclear deterrence perspective, they need to reach out to new partners. But they consider that the US are the main guarantee for security and the main deterrent when it comes to nuclear deterrence. So it's the main partner. NATO is still an important alliance, and France would come as a complement to that.
But then how does this affect NATO? Do you envisage that this newfound unity or this new path that Germany and France are on, can this really go a long way to affecting how NATO approaches big talking points like Ukraine?
I think Merz and Macron agree on the fact that the European pillar within NATO needs to be strengthened. So it's also good for the US that the European Union takes up more responsibility, and European states within NATO take more responsibility. And if you look at the Hague summit of NATO back in June, NATO countries agreed to the 5% target, and Germany actually agreed to reaching the target even before 2035, already in 2029. So I think this can work well together, but for the time being, Europe is very much dependent from a security and defense perspective on the US, be it operationally speaking, but also when it comes to armament. So when we talk about operations, this question about boots on the ground in Ukraine, well, first of all, you'd need a ceasefire or a peace treaty for that. But many politicians in Germany say we need US support for that, otherwise it's not possible.
That is, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it, but US support with the caveat of making sure that they stay ahead in the technology race against the United States. Thank you so much for joining us and just providing your thoughts there, Marie Krpata, Research Fellow at the Study Committee on Franco-German Relations.